I'm going to have to learn how to quit a little earlier back there so that I can get back in here. But we are in Numbers 15 tonight, and really thankful for the opportunity to study with you tonight. When we come to Numbers 15, well, you know this. What has just transpired in chapters 13 and 14?
6 spies out of the land.
That's right. And? Gave a bad report. And? They would not go in. The whole point of this mission, the whole point of this journey, they would not go in. And God sentenced them to 40 years wandering in the wilderness. That generation is going to die. Chapters 15 through 19, we're waiting on a generation to die. This was impressive to me. From Exodus 19, Mount Sinai, until Numbers 10 and verse 10 is 1 year of material, right? So it's something, I think it's 58 and a half chapters of material that covers 1 year of time. You add to that the material that goes from Numbers 10 to Numbers, what would that be, 14. We're talking about like a year and 3 months of material. So what does that make us? 62 and a half chapters, about 1 year and a few months. 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 covers 38 years, right? So we go from, well, it's really, we pick up in the 40th year in chapter 20 and verse 1. I think they get time served for years 1 and 2, more or less, as we go into the land. But what 15 through 19 is waiting on a generation to die. So Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers are preparing a nation to go into the land. Deuteronomy will be preparing a nation to go into the land. Numbers 15 through 19 is waiting on these folks to die. That's all that's left for them, which is tragic and it's sad, but it is necessary. But I do want to notice something as we come to chapter 15. And Brother Waldron in his material, he puts this with some of the sacrifice stuff in the book of Leviticus, chapters 1 through 4, 1 through 5. We didn't specifically talk about Numbers, these passages then, but we'll kind of leave that connected to that. But I do want to talk about, at the end of chapter 14, it breaks away from the narrative and goes into this discussion of sacrifices. And it seems a little out of place because when we come back to chapter 16, we pick up with the narrative again. And it's kind of strange. Why these laws and these regulations in the middle of the narrative? Let me give you what I think is going on here. Look at verses 1 and 2. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land you are to inhabit, which I am giving you." Now, what do you hear in that? When you come into the land which I'm giving you. They're going to come into the land. I think this is a hopeful instruction. So maybe here's part of the point. You have failed. You have refused to go in. You have been disobedient. That has not affected God's commitment or His faithfulness to His promises to bring the descendants of Abraham into the land that He showed Abraham. You may have failed. You may have been disobedient. But instruction goes on because Israel will be in the land even if it's not that generation. Maybe there was some kind of inclination. Well, if we don't go in, then God just can't do anything. Like he's just kind of he's handcuffed. He's tied. No, He's going to accomplish His purposes whether we're on board with that or not. And these instructions go on because it's almost to say, listen, the plan is still in place, and don't forget that. So we won't. But you see down in verse 17. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I bring to you." I will make mention that from verses 22 through 31, there is a distinction made between an unintentional sin and a high-handed sin. That there are sins that maybe our attitude is one of we misunderstood or we were ignorant or in a moment of weakness. And then there are some that are just outright rebellion. And from what I can tell, there is no sacrifice for the sin that's of outright rebellion. That just says, I don't care anymore. Now, it can be that maybe I was in rebellion and I confess that sin. And I think that almost moves the category from a high-handed sin to an unintentional sin. A change of attitude can affect that. But anyway, that carries us through about verse 31. And I think really we're going to pick up with the narrative beginning at verse 32.
I noticed there in verse 30, it said that presumptuous sin, they should be cut off. And I found out what cut off means. Put to death.
Yeah, that's right.
But
yeah, and I think we get an example of a high-handed sin in verse 32 and following. And maybe that is part of why these instructions are here, so we kind of have a context for what's going on in the succeeding verses. Yeah, that's good. All right, anything else through 31? Any questions about all of that?
We're going back to where
Yeah.
the 40 days of spying. It was explained to me quite a while back. God gave him 40 days to spy out the land. And eventually, because of the bad report, he gave him 40 years of wandering and not even knowing that they even lost their lives.
Mm-hmm.
40 days, 40 years.
Yeah. That's exactly right. All right. Any other questions or comments to the first part of chapter 19? 15. Sorry, I was looking at chapter 19. Locke has got my iPad and used my Bible app as a drawing pad, so I'm trying to get some of that out of the way so I can see what's going on here. Okay. In the 32. Verse 32. I think we're ready.
now, while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, the man must surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So, as the Lord commanded Moses, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. It's pretty simple to understand, isn't it? A Sabbath breaker is put to death. So it's straightforward, isn't it? It's plain and clear. This guilty man was stoned to death. In verse 34 there, it says they put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done to him. I'm just, that struck me kind of like, well, they should have known, right? But anyway, he was stoned to death, and is there anything you'd like to say about that?
I do just want to mention one connection to Hebrews chapter 10. You remember that passage that says, for if we go on sinning willfully after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins. I think that would be kind of the New Testament equivalent to a high-handed sin, right? We ignore what is happening. But a terrifying expectation of judgment and the fury of a fire which will consume the adversaries. Anyone who has set aside the law of Moses dies without mercy by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. This is one of those cases. I actually think, in fact, this may be the case that the Hebrew writer is referring to specifically. So here is a man who is guilty of breaking the Sabbath law, and he's put to death. Now, this is at Moses' instruction. It's from the Lord. It's through Moses. But notice what he says, the Hebrew writer says in verse 29. How much worse punishment do you think he will deserve who has trampled underfoot the Son of God and has regarded as defiled the blood of the covenant which he has sanctified and has insulted the Spirit of grace? So basically, I think maybe we look at Numbers and we say, well, that's so harsh. I'm so glad we live under a different covenant. And the Hebrew writer would say to us, well, it's not any better. It's not any better for you, right? It's not any safer for you. If you disregard the Lord's instructions, you're not just disregarding the law of Moses, you're disregarding the Son of God, by whose blood you were sanctified. You're disregarding the Spirit of grace, and you're trotting all of that underfoot, and you're just spitting in the face of the God who loved you and died for you. So all that is to say is when we need to be careful about looking at this and say, well, that's pretty harsh. Oh, it's worse. You know, it's worse than maybe we would even think for us. I say worse. God's judgment is going to be made even more more visible as a result if we reject what Christ has said. All right.
We tend to think it's harsh because you look at it, you say, well, all he was doing was gathering.
That's right. Yes. Yes, and I think that takes us back up to verse 31 with a high-handed sin. Why was gathering sticks on the Sabbath something to be done? Look at verse 31. This is the definition of a high-handed sin. Because he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment, that person shall be utterly cut off. His iniquity shall be on him. You know, when you tell your children to do something, and maybe it's a small thing, right? Maybe it's don't touch that, right? And they do. Well, the issue is not as much the thing on the surface of what they've done. It is that they've just disregarded you. It's that they've not respected the authority. And how much more so is that true with an all-wise God who tells us things that are only for our good. And when we just say, not worried about that, then it is a commentary not just on our understanding of that law, but on our understanding of Him and on our opinion of Him. And that's what makes it so serious.
You hear people say sometimes, well, I just don't think God, that will matter to God. It's just, it's a little thing. And people shouldn't.
No, if He revealed it, it matters to Him.
Right.
if it's in His Word, He had intention behind it. That's very good. Okay, and then there's this note, beginning in verse 37, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. And it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, to do them, not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after. So you shall remember and do all my commandments and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. So here was going to be a visible reminder, something to put in place to remind them to keep the commandments of the Lord. And I think that this is a demonstration that God understands that sometimes visible, physical reminders are helpful to His people in keeping the covenant. And of course, we live under a spiritual covenant that is much less maybe tangible or visible than that old covenant was with the temple and the sacrifices and all of that. And yet we still have visible reminders. I think that baptism is a visible, tangible reminder. As we see someone immersed, it's a reminder of what happens when we are. The Lord's Supper is probably the best example of that. These daily reminders of the covenant, weekly maybe, reminders of the case of the covenant that we've made. Anything you had to say through end of 15? All right, let's pick up with chapter 16. Anybody else have any comments? Anything we overlooked?
That's about how the Lord included the people in this punishment of this individual. And what that would mean to them.
Yeah.
The heartbreak over carrying this out.
Yes.
Everybody would be a participant per se. And do you think there was a lesson there? Any kind of lesson there as far as God says something, be surreal?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah. That's
Even for them, they thought this is kind of maybe even in some sense pick up sticks.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah. Well, let's. I think that's exactly right. Let's put it on the other side and say, "Whoa, what a sad thing to lose your life over." Those sticks couldn't have waited one more day. But in reality, when it comes to our soul, everything's picking up sticks. You know what I mean? There's nothing that is worth despising the word of the Lord over. And we may think, well, I can't believe God is so picky to legislate this. Well, if you think it's small, then don't worry. Then don't do it. And just let it go. Because it's obviously not that big a deal to you. So don't lose your soul over it.
it's funny how it's always small for direction.
That's exactly right. It always should be small to God. It never should be small to us. It's and the thing is I've told you before the story about my grandfather. He was in a dorm room in college, and somebody came in. He heard him rustle around, pick some up, walk out the door, and come back in, and went out, came back in. And the guy mumbled to himself, I ain't losing my soul over a bar of soap. Because evidently he had stolen it and brought it. And it's like, well, that's silly. But, in reality, everything's a bar of soap. If it's a relationship or if it's comfort or if it's a good job, in the grand scheme of eternity, it's not worth any more than a bar of soap is. So don't lose your soul over a bar of soap. Just recognize that anything is picking up sticks. And you say, well, I can't believe it's so small. Well, he should have just left it for tomorrow then, if it's so small. Okay, I know I kind of belabored that, but I think that's all right. Multi-talented. All right. Chapter 16. You want to take us through that or the beginning of it?
Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men. And they rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? So here's the problem. They put together this, you might call it a conspiracy against Moses and Aaron. And they accuse them of usurping their authority. And they get these men, it says men of renown. This would be men who are highly honored or widely recognized, as you might refer to them even as famous men. But they get 250 of those men, and they tell Moses that they're not the only ones that are important and have authority. They're just saying we all are on the same page, basically. And of course, we know that's not true. And they accuse them of taking on this authority themselves. Who chose Moses and Aaron? They didn't choose themselves, did they? And they didn't just say, well, we're going to be the leaders. Of course, the Lord chose them. And verse 4, so when Moses heard it, he fell on his face, and he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. That one whom he chooses, he will cause to come near to him. Do this, take censers, Korah, and all your company. Put fire in them and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord chooses is the Holy One. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi. So Moses says, what's their reaction, the first reaction here in verse 4? Right, they fell on their face just like they did at Kadesh Barnea when the Israelites refused to enter the land of Canaan. So that's just an expression of grief and sadness that they did here. And Moses proposes a solution to this problem. It was a test or a challenge is given to them. And they said, take censers, put fire in them, and appear before the Lord tomorrow. And he'll solve this problem tomorrow. And then, of course, Moses accuses them of wrongdoing here in this matter. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi. The Levites were special anyway, weren't they? And here is Korah, who is the grandson of Kohath, right? And he is wanting to take too much power or too much authority here, and he tells them that they should be satisfied, I think, with their status among the children of Israel, because they have a special place anyway. And go ahead.
Yeah. So let me mention just right quick in verse 3. This is their accusation: you've gone too far. For all in the congregation of Israel are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? Were they right that the whole congregation was holy? Yeah, in some way, right? And were they right that the Lord was among all of them? Yeah. But what they're doing is they're pitting two truths against each other. They are saying God said this, so this can't be true. And I think sometimes folks do that with Bible study. Maybe like when we're talking about what it takes for a person to be saved. And they go, all the passages say that you have to believe, right? And they will say, well, these passages say you have to believe. And they just ignore them. It's like, yeah, there are a lot of passages that say the congregation is all holy. And there's a lot of passages that say the Lord is among them. But there's also several passages that they were just ignoring about how God had exalted Moses and Aaron and that part of the congregation. And have they not learned from the Miriam incident? I mean, it's not been that far in advance. So I think that's interesting. And so in verse 9 is, what verse did you read through?
I think I read through 7.
Okay. Yeah. So in verse 9, is it too small a thing for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself to do service in the tabernacle of the Lord and to stand before the congregation to minister to them? Is that not enough? You have a wonderful privileged position and you just got to be in charge? Like that, is that the only thing you're going to be satisfied with, is being the person who's in power and authority? And you see, they want to make this about, we want the privilege of serving. Oh, you've got the privilege of serving. What you want is the power and the authority. And they didn't have that, and that's what they wanted. And so, would you seek the priesthood also? So look at verse 11. Therefore, it is against the Lord that you and all your company have gathered together. What is Aaron that you grumble against him? Aaron is, he's just a pawn in this. The Lord's who put him there. The Lord's the one who arranged this. You think you're coming and challenging Aaron, but who is Aaron? He's a nobody in the grand scheme of things. He's the one that the Lord put there. And so when we oppose God's arrangement, we oppose God. We might think we're opposing the leaders that are over us, but really we're opposing them. I think that's true in a congregation. I think it's true in a home. I think it's true in a nation. We might think that we're just opposing the person, but if our problem is with the arrangement itself, then our problem is with the Lord and not with the person who's in that position of authority.
I had wrote a note down years ago that said they thought Moses and Aaron was going to get something more out of it than they were. It was all equal. Everybody was getting the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. There were great blessings that came, and in some ways Moses and Aaron bear the greater responsibility. And it looks like Korah and them, maybe they want the privileges and all that. But I think the fundamental thing, as you're saying, is that God was among them and he was blessing them, but this was not theirs to grab a hold of. And so, anyway, I think that takes us through about verse 11. Any comments or questions? Other comments or questions you got? All right. So verse 12. Let's see here. Yeah. Look at verse 12. Moses sent the call to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and they said, "We will not come up. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you must make yourself prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into a land of flowing with milk and honey, nor give us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." All right, so Moses brings this challenge, and Dathan and Abiram, they say, we're not going to take up the challenge. Now, why not? Why do they say they're not going to take up the challenge? What do they say Moses has done? So he took them out of a land, he says, that flowed with milk and honey, and did not take them into a land that flowed with milk and honey. So I got several things to say about that. So first of all, a land flowing with milk, is that what they were brought out of? No, Jeremiah calls that an iron furnace. It was a land of their affliction. So first of all. Second of all, who brought them up? Moses, but really it was the Lord. The Lord. So again, be careful who you're challenging here. And also, he says, and you didn't bring us to a land that flowed with milk and honey. You didn't bring us to houses and vineyards. Why not? Anybody remember why? Because they didn't want to go. It's like, I mean, it's the most, amnesiac, forgetful criticism I've ever heard, where they say, you didn't take us into the land. Well, you remember you did have a say in that. I was trying to say, let's go, and y'all said, no. And so, yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, yeah. There's no logic here. There's no, it's just, and Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey for them, and I have not harmed one of them. In other words, don't even note them. And so,
They're not challenging just Moses and Aaron. They're challenging God.
that's right. Absolutely. All right. Mr. Dwight, you want to carry us from verse 16 on?
And Moses said to Korah, tomorrow you and all your company be present before the Lord, you and they, as well as Aaron. Let each take his censer and put incense in it, and each of you bring his censer before the Lord, 250 censers, both you and Aaron, each with his censer. So every man took his censer, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and stood at the door of the tabernacle of meeting with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. So God is speaking to Moses and Aaron here, and he tells them to move away from all the people because he wants to destroy them. And in verse 22, it says that then they fell on their faces and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and you be angry with all the congregation? So Moses and Aaron, they plead for the lives of all the others of the congregation. And they're trying to, intercede for these people here. And go ahead if you want to
Yes.
comment on that.
Yeah. I don't have anything really extra to say except for the Lord honors that request. And he says, okay, back away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. I don't know that all of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram's challenges were exactly the same. They just kind of have made an alliance to go against Moses and Aaron, right? Korah's challenge was, we ought to be the priests too. And Dathan and Abiram, really their complaint is about what Moses has done, bringing them out of Egypt and not getting them into the land. But all of them are challenging Moses, and so they're all going to be punished in the same way. And so God honors the intercession that Moses was. How many times is this that Moses has interceded for the people? And you would think, and he will continue to do so, even in this chapter. You would think at some point he would say, look, y'all deserve it. But he continues to intercede over and over, which is interesting because then we come to the book of Hebrews that talks about Jesus as the better Moses. If Moses intercedes this much, Jesus is better, and he intercedes even more so. So let's pick up in, let's see here, verse 25. Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him, and he spoke to the congregation, saying, depart, please, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest you be swept away with all their sins. So they got away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents, together with their wives, their sons, and their little ones. And Moses said, hereby you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, and that it has not been of my own accord. If these men die, all as men die, or if they are visited by the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you shall know that these men have despised the Lord. So Moses is saying, I'm going to show you that it was not me who put myself in this position. It was not me who brought you up out of Egypt. It was not me who put Aaron in the place of high priest. As soon as he had finished speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the people who belonged to Korah and all their goods. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, "Lest the earth swallow us up." And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men offering the incense. You get echoes of not only is there a new thing, but you also get echoes of Nadab and Abihu. People, not only is it they are approaching God inappropriately, but it's the wrong people who are approaching God. And so fire comes out and consumes them. Okay. Anything through verse 35? Any you guys? All right, let's pick up at verse 36 then. You want to take us there?
Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Tell Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, to pick up the censers out of the blaze, for they are holy, and scatter the fire some distance away. The censers of these men who sinned against their own souls, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the altar. Because they presented them before the Lord, therefore they are holy, and they shall be a sign to the children of Israel. So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers, which those who were burned up had presented, and they were hammered out as a covering on the altar to be a memorial to the children of Israel, that no outsider who is not a descendant of Aaron should come near to offer incense before the Lord, that he might not become like Korah and his companions, just as the Lord had said to him through Moses. And so this is after the men were consumed, the censers were left intact, and he tells them to hammer these into golden plates, and they would be used as a covering for the altar. And this was to be a sign to the Israelites, something for them to look at and remember what had happened here, and not try to take authority that has not been given to them. Basically,
Anything through verse 40? I believe this is referenced in a couple of places in the New Testament, right? Maybe the book of Jude references the Korah, Dathan, and Abiram and their challenge of Moses' authority here. Now notice verse 41. I would say inconceivably, like unbelievably, but maybe we're a little bit like this too. On the next day, all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron. Like, guys, just learn the lesson on Korah, Dathan, and Abiram's dime. Like, you don't have to pay for this education. They've already paid for it. Just learn the lesson. But they grumble, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." The people of the Lord? These people are challenging the arrangement that God has established, or has been clearly demonstrated. And Moses did say, "Look, if something new happens, it's not me, it's the Lord." And they say, "You, Moses, have killed the people of the Lord." And when the congregation assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from the midst of the congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces. And Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put fire on it from off the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them, for wrath has gone out from the Lord, the plague has begun." So Aaron took it as Moses said, and ran into the midst of the assembly, and behold, the plague had already begun among the people, and he put on the incense and made atonement for the people, and he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, beside those who had died in the affair of Korah. And Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting when the plague was stopped. So here again, the people complain. What does God do? He sets out to destroy them. I think the intention, I think he would have eliminated the whole congregation if Moses and Aaron had not again made intercession. But they do, and the plague is stopped, and only 14,700 were killed. No, a significant, but again, the challenge here is not against Moses and against Aaron, it's against the Lord and his arrangement, his authority. And so that the people this generation is not learning the lesson. I think the next generation will probably watch all of this stuff happen to their parents, and they will say, "Couldn't be us, wouldn't be us." we're going to learn that lesson and not challenge the authority of the Lord, at least in that way to that degree. Okay. Anything else through 16?
No.
Okay. All right, 17, you want to take us there?
Okay. Excuse me. Here's another indicator that Aaron was the high priest in charge here. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and get from them a rod from each father's house, all their leaders according to their father's houses, 12 rods. Write each man's name on his rod. And you shall write Aaron's name on the rod of Levi, for there shall be one rod for the head of each father's house. Then you shall place them in the tabernacle of meeting before the testimony, where I meet with you. And it shall be that the rod of the man whom I choose will blossom. Thus I will rid myself of the complaints of the children of Israel. And so he says, take 12 rods, one from each tribe, and an extra rod for the tribe of Levi, and lay them close to the ark and write their names on them. And this test would be that the rod that blossoms is the one that the Lord has chosen. And so that's pretty straightforward and simple there. Go ahead, and if you want to make a comment.
I don't think I have anything else to say through there. Now, so you made it through verse 6. Verse 7, right? So Moses deposits the rods before Yahweh or the Lord in the tent of the testimony. And whose rod blooms? Aaron's, yeah. It blossoms. The rod of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds and produced flowers and bore ripe almonds. Moses then brought all the rods from the presence of Yahweh to all the sons of Israel, and they looked, and each man took his rod. Yahweh said to Moses, Put back the rod of Aaron before the testimony, keep as a sign against the rebels, that you may put an end to their grumblings against me, so that they will not die. Did you read that? Okay, all right. Now, thus Moses did, just as Yahweh had commanded him, so he did. So this is going to be another visible sign that Aaron is the one who's in the rightful place. And I don't know that this really ends the grumblings. It doesn't end the grumblings, but there's been every indication so far that the arrangement of the leaders is God ordained, and we couldn't make it any more clear. And the reaction of the people in verse 12 is interesting. Then the sons of Israel spoke to Moses, saying, Behold, we are breathing our last breath. We are perishing. We are perishing. Everyone who comes near to the tabernacle of Yahweh must die. Are we to breathe our utter last? I think they're being a little dramatic. And they're acting, it seems to me they're acting as if anybody who just comes anywhere near the tabernacle gets killed. As if they didn't have any role in that, right? We're dead men walking, and God's just going to kill anybody who approaches the tabernacle. Well, that's not true. It was reserved for a special group of people, and they needed to respect that boundary. But God wanted them to draw near. He just wanted them to draw near in the approved way. And so we ought not, what they were doing, I think, is saying, if we can't approach in the way we want to, then God's just unreasonable and trying to kill us all. I think there are people like that now. I think there are people who say, basically, if I can't be a Christian in the way I want to, then God is being unreasonable and just, he's too judgmental. And so you see that same attitude in people today. Well, if I'm bringing it ought to be accepted, whether that's worship or whether it's the life I'm living or the conditions that I want to meet. And that attitude is not new, of just saying that God is unpleasable. And if he doesn't accept what I bring, then he just can't be pleased. And that's not the case at all. Any thoughts or comments through the end of chapter 17?
I thought it was interesting that the rod not only blossomed, but it produced almonds.
Yeah. Above and beyond.
Yes.
It seems like an excessive demonstration of that. Yeah, very good.
So now how many items are in the ark?
The tablets of stone?
Yes. The manna.
The manna?
and now the rod.
And the rod.
There's three
Yeah.
items in the ark map.
All right. Now, we have covered what we were supposed to cover for tonight, and it's not even time yet. So that's outstanding. Okay, so let's look quickly at the beginning of chapter 18. Now, we go back just a little bit to look at some more of the laws and provisions. But I want you to look at what the provisions are in chapter 18. Anybody have a heading there at the top of chapter 18 that tells you what it's about? Duties of the priests and Levites. That seems appropriate given the last couple of chapters, doesn't it? Let's have a little re-education course on who's supposed to serve where. We've lost several, and so we need. So the Lord said to Aaron, "You and your sons and your father's household with you shall bear the guilt in connection with the sanctuary, and you and your sons shall bear the guilt in connection with your priesthood. But bring near with you also your brothers, the tribe of Levi, the tribe of your father, that they may join with you and minister with you, while you and your sons with you are before the tent of the testimony. And they shall thus keep your responsibility, and the responsibility of all the tent. But they shall not come near to the furnishings of the sanctuary and altar, so that neither they nor you will die. And they shall be joined with you, and keep the responsibility of the tent of meeting, for all the service of the tent. But an outsider may not come near you. So you shall keep the responsibility of the sanctuary and the responsibility of the altar, so that there will no longer be wrath on the sons of Israel. And behold, I myself have taken your brothers the Levites from among the sons of Israel. They are a gift to you, given to Yahweh, to perform the service for the tent of meeting. But you and your sons with you shall keep your priesthood, and everything that concerns the altar, and inside the veil you are to perform service. I am giving you the priesthood as a bestowed service, but the outsider who comes near shall be put to death." And so in this passage, the Lord reiterates the seriousness and the responsibility that Aaron and his sons have, and that the sons of Levi have. The sons of Levi have a privileged position. They are responsible for the care of the whole tent of meeting. And any outsider, anybody who's not a son of Levi, who comes and tries to take that responsibility is going to be killed. And that Aaron and the Levites will bear the responsibility for that. But in the inner sanctuary, inside the holy place, and the most holy place, that's Aaron's responsibility. And the Levites don't have that responsibility. So I think this is connected to chapter 17 and a reiteration. This is what it means for you to be the priest. This is what it means for the Levites to be the Levites. And this is what this is the special responsibility and role that you have. And I think that's a good place to leave on.
I think so.
All right. Thank y'all very much for your good participation.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.